exploration companies need to really understand about family office investors, what they're looking for, the questions they ask, to start bringing those two groups together and start driving non-traditional capital back into the mining sector. And so the folks we've got here today, we've got Steve Saltzstein at the end with Forest Family Office out of New York. We've got Luke Alexander, the CEO at Newcore Gold, Miranda Werstiuk, Director of Corporate Development at OCIM. And we've got Steve Jong, the CEO of Verify. So we're going to jump right in. I first wanted to ask Steve S., what should mining and exploration companies understand about family offices as a potential source of investment?
I hope everyone's doing great. It's funny, before I came here, I was talking to a family office, telling them, I'm going to Toronto next week for kind of the biggest gold conference of the year. And they said to me, yeah, we don't invest in newfangled industries. They really said that to me. And I think that says a lot about how family offices perceive mining opportunities. And I actually think it's a good thing because, there's probably been such a long pause of family offices really looking at mining as an investable industry that it's almost like the new .com. And so I really think that there's an opportunity here, and a lot of it is they've tried a lot of other things that have failed, right? I mean, they've tried crypto, it hasn't worked out so great. They've tried cannabis, that's been pretty tough lately too. And I think both of those industries probably sucked up assets from family offices, and I think what is old is new again. So that's what I would say.
Miranda, how about you?
Hi, everybody. So we come at it a little bit differently from OCIM. We are a metals trading business, and we have been funded by a European family. So we look a little further along the Lassonde curve, so development, production, and near-term production. So I think there's huge opportunity. I think what we've had to do as a team here in Toronto, because we have a Toronto team, a Paris team, and a Geneva team, is educate. And mining has this kind of murky, blurry reputation. It's risky, it's not consistent, but the people are phenomenal. And the opportunity is phenomenal, the projects are phenomenal. So what we have tried to filter up to HQ is really understanding there's opportunity here, it's not linear, there's going to be a lot of gray area, but if you spend the time, you do your diligence, and you have the right team, and you put money into an opportunity with the right team and the right project, then you'll have success.
And on that, Miranda, what do you think makes now the right time for family offices to be looking at the sector?
Well, I think, it's interesting because the family that has backed OCIM created their wealth in real estate development. So they understand hard assets, and I think there was a bit of a natural evolution into the mining space. I think, we're a trader, so we are looking at opportunities where we can deploy the capital, and then we have a sister company in Switzerland that leverages that delivery, so hedging, options, puts, calls, derivatives. So I think if we can find, the companies that are small scale producers for us specifically, then we can really carve out a niche for ourselves. And I think trying to again educate HQ on the opportunities here is what we need to do.
Look, what would you say as one of those companies?
Well, I guess it's interesting looking at it from a family office perspective. I mean, in terms of family offices, by definition, they're typically looking and have a much longer duration in terms of the capital that they're ultimately providing, and they're looking generations ahead. And with that dedicated long-term focus, you often get family offices who are looking for value in the sector, and when there's blood in the water, that's ultimately when long-term capital value investors come to work. Yes, they'll funnel into the cannabis sector and hot sectors and chase those dollars, but the fundamental capital that typical family offices have is long-term dedicated capital that's there for generations to come. With that in mind, yes, the mining sector can be a very hot sector when you see commodity prices on a hockey stick. Ultimately, a lot of money floods into the sector, but we're seeing the complete opposite in the mining sector at the moment, when you've got the major mining companies out there, the BHP Rios of the world, who are actually providing good yields, good dividend yields, higher dividend yields than you'll get in pretty much any other sector at the moment. That's when value investors, family offices should be stepping in. And typically, like any sector, it becomes a waterfall effect. As Tesla gets, really expensive, it flows down into the mid caps and the small caps. As the BHPs of the world start to get more expensive, it funnels down into the smaller mid cap companies. Right now, it's been a very difficult time to ultimately invest in the mining sector. The junior sector has been out of favor for quite a while. So that's the time that I think is interesting for family offices to step in, look at it on a 10, 20, 50-year horizon, and recognize that the commodity sector is a very cyclical business, and you ultimately need to be buying at the bottom of the cycle and sticking with those investments over time. So I think right now, a lot of blood in the sector. Gold specifically, it's been a tough sector with the US dollar performing extremely well, and these are the times that make sense for family offices to be stepping in.
I think that raises a question maybe Steve from Verify. Like, what do you see happening in the sector that maybe non-traditional mining investors, like there's stuff going on that they may not be aware of or even know to look for, that it would tell them to start paying closer attention to what's going on?
I think in mining, in general, you're finally starting to see sort of some big macro trends and opportunities from the mining sector show up within that. The obvious one right now is the energy transition, anything battery metals. There's lithium, copper. If you can think of it goes into a Tesla or an iPhone, you should probably invest in it right now. But those big trends, what they do is they open the door, whether it's family office or generalists or just anybody who doesn't typically look at the sector, because otherwise, if you're a gold bug or if you're just have a very high conviction for a specific type of metal for whatever your thesis is, that's great if you have a fund that's like essentially dedicated to investing in a certain type of metal or base metal or whatever it is. But I think one of the most exciting parts about the sector right now is you have these big macro trends. Like nobody questions the fact, well, some people do, but I drive a Tesla. Nobody questions the fact it's a better car. And that's a trend that you don't need to be a mining bug or like really junior mining stocks or anything like that. The energy transition that's taking place, we're not stopping that. There's a massive shortage of metals for us to be able to accomplish that. And I think it ultimately ends up being a really exciting time for the sector, because what you've done is you've given sort of a rationale or a logic or something for the average person. And again, whether that's a family office or generalist or someone who just doesn't typically or have some other reason to be paying attention to the sector, you've given them an excuse to actually go and invest in the sector. And the other thing I think I'll say to that is, what's exciting about that is a junior is a junior. So it might be the battery metals and the energy transition that's attracting all this capital to the sector. I think we got to see with meme stocks and other things, what happens when sort of large amounts of small kind of pools of capital come in volume. It can have, like, the mining sector as a whole is very, very small compared to like literally Apple's market cap when it comes down to it. And as a sector as a whole, even if it's sort of the energy metals, the battery metals or that are attracting this capital in, I think you are going to see that start to flow into, hey, I had a positive experience by investing in this company, whether it's lithium or copper, whatever it is. I do think you're going to see some of that flow into into silver and gold, because you're sort of, what's happening in the back of this, you're educating people on what it's like to invest in sort of a mining junior, or just in the industry as a whole. And they start to understand things like percent, like 10 meters of X percent of whatever. or grams per ton, or little things like that. So I'm probably way off where the question went. But
Hopefully everyone has a drink in their
but when it comes down to it, it actually is a very, very exciting time for the center. Like our whole business is based on educating people so they understand what like this sector does as a whole. And the best way to attract people into it, you can visualize things using things like Verify. The best way is that they have a positive experience investing in something and they make some money. Because that naturally, we're all greedy humans at the end of the day, and we want to do more of that. And if you start to see that, you are going to see a lot of capital come into the sector, and I think everybody within the mining sector is going to benefit from that.
I think that's a great point. And Steve S., I wonder, when you're talking to family offices, are there things like that that you have to educate them about, Rob, when they start to look at projects? Like, a lot of you have heard me vent about the fact that as a geologist, I love an ore body slide, but you put that in front of somebody who hasn't invested in the sector before, and their eyes glass over, they don't know what you're talking about. Like, what do you have to teach people before they come in?
You know, if I were to give any CEO advice about how to attract a family office, I would tell them it's a relationship situation. And the best thing you can do is set expectations and meet those expectations. And so if you're a company, you know, you need to make sure that you have relatable milestones that you can prove yourself to these family offices. And that's how you develop the relationships. And the reason it's worth it is because, you know, they're going to put a lot more zeros on the check when they go out to buy your stock in the open market. The other thing I would say is, and this goes to the greatness of what Steve is building in his company, is, you know, I was on the conference floor today. All the presentations, 98% of the presentations are in the exact same manner as they were in 1998. I don't think it's remotely an exaggeration, and I just think that the mining industry is doing itself a great disservice by, you know, not modernizing it. They're not making the stories relatable. And if you want to attract a family office, one of the great things you can do is to make your story relatable and human. And I think it's just a missed opportunity.
Exactly.
And I guess back to you, Steve, then. Steve S. teed you up for this. So how do you think technology helps facilitate non-traditional capital specifically coming into the space? What's the opportunities?
So I think what technology does, if used right, like so Verify, we create interactive presentations. If it's used right, it can be highly effective. If it's used wrong, it's way worse than PowerPoint. I would say one of, and not to pump this tire, but I would say one of the most dynamic presenters and clients who have Verify is Luke. Like the number of times I've heard random kind of sales desks from investment banks and investors talk about the Newcore presentation that they saw, and you can see all of our stuff now says Verify in the corner because people would always say, what was that thing that he was using? It was incredible. If it's used right, and especially if it's used in an inquisitive nature, and by that I mean the industry has a tendency to, you have your PowerPoint and you just puke facts at people, you don't actually stop and ask. Because if we were to sit down one-on-one with every person in this room, everybody's going to be looking for something different. Everybody has a unique level of understanding. They're all looking for different things. And it brings that. And technology, if used properly, can allow for that. It allows you to sort of, what do you want to get out of this presentation? Because as humans, whether you're an investor, whoever you are, you just want to also feel heard. And you can't do that, and I spend my life just bashing PowerPoints, even though you can bring PowerPoint into a verified presentation. But you can't do that if you don't have, like in our case, we take an entire company's data set, every single component set, like photography from site and 3D models, we put it into a format so it's sitting there ready at your fingertips. But in any conversation, you're only going to use sort of 4 or 5% of that entire data set to ensure that you facilitate a level of understanding with the person across the table. That's the one thing I think, whether it's technology or not, I guess PDAC is no different. You're on a trade floor and you have this tendency as you're running your company booth to ask people and you're sort of grilling them to find out if they're investors, because if they're not, it kind of wastes your time and you want to move on in case the next person has some money that they can invest in their company. But it's actually the best opportunity to talk to random people and canvass them to understand, like, what do people want to hear? How is my company perceived? because that can flow into a better understanding of how I'm going to market myself and present my company going forward. So anyway, there's a lot of things that technology unlocks if it's used effectively. If anyone ever wants to see an effective presentation, he's better than our own sales team. I'd say just watch Luke present sometime.
You guys are like setting each other up here. I don't even have to moderate. So Luke, I guess now I have to come up with a totally different question because he just answered for you basically. But I guess if you were talking to a family office, what are some things you wish they understood about the sector that would help you, have a relationship with kind of new sources of capital?
I think there's been a number of interesting points raised here, and I think one of them in terms of building relationship is obviously something that's crucial. And a lot of, family offices, the reason they're family offices is because, there's a family that's been very successful, and lots of those families are ultimately entrepreneurs. That has led to that wealth that can allow them to have a family office. So I think one of the key things to look at is alignment. So, our company as management and directors, we own 24% of the business, and we've ultimately invested our capital alongside other investors. So I think that's a good place to be starting that relationship that Steve's referring to is, true alignment with your investors, and being able to kind of point to that is something that's important, because I think that's the best way to start a relationship, is being able to look someone across the table in the eyes and say, listen, I've got much more on the line in this company, in this investment than you'll ever have. But that'd be a starting point. In terms of using technology, I think one of the things that we've found with Verify is in today's world where everything, whether it's a TikTok or other social media that's kind of fired at us in these snapshots, the ability to be able to go from kind of PDFs to 360 images to to videos to 3D models is a way to kind of really stimulate your audience in terms of keeping them engaged and being able to kind of walk them through a story. So that's something that I think is quite helpful. But first and foremost, I think that alignment is probably one of the most crucial pieces. And then, again, back to my earlier comments about family offices are often looking for value. So if you can find a way to highlight the fundamental underpinning of value for your project, for your company, but then paint that, blue sky upside that lots of mining projects have, then that's something I think that's a good way to present a company and story as well.
I would add one thing I always tell people who are new to the industry is mining is one of the few places where you can pick up the phone and talk to the CEO when you call the office. Because, within probably about a day or so, right? Incredible accessibility to management, I think, is really unique to the mining and exploration space. So if you've got questions, you want to understand what's going on, you should never invest in something that you don't understand, right? I think that's where the data and the technical parts of the industry might not be super accessible to people. The people side of our industry is very accessible, I think, in a unique way. Well, to kind of tie things up here, I'd like to just go down the row, and if we kind of, everybody in this room probably agrees that we'd love to see more money come into the sector from family offices and non-traditional capital. So what do you think is one step either side can do to start kind of moving towards that table?
So I should probably say you should also use Verify and Prospector. I think the one thing that sort of, we've all been trained, and prior to this I used to be the CEO of a mining company, mineral exploration mining company. You're very much trained in that headspace to sort of almost scream all the time. And I think the one thing that you can do is sort of create a strategy around how you communicate your business based on actually trying to listen and understand what your audience wants to hear. Because even, and I'm not that old, but in I'd say the 10 years, 12 years I've been in the sector, how people digest information has changed drastically. And it's not as simple as, well, just put your PowerPoint on TikTok and that'll take care of it. Like there's so much more to it than that. So I think the one thing that sort of to attract more capital to the sector, it's not like any one fancy technology is going to solve the problem. It's actually going to be able to create a communication strategy around sort of, and the way we get those inputs is by listening. And whether it's the stakeholders, investors, community groups, talking to other companies, I think you're going to see a step change in sort of the quality of communication that comes from the sector if we start taking more of that approach there.
Well, I think from our perspective, communication, like an open and transparent line of communication between the team that does, our team that does the diligence, and then ultimately the decision maker who deploys the capital, is to have that constant flow, right? We've often said as a team here that, our CEO, straight about background, but he's genuinely interested in deploying capital into this industry. And it's all about open line of communication with him and for him to understand the reality and for us to communicate the reality of this business, the risks in this business, and how do we look to mitigate those risks, but also understand what his expectations are and what the expectations of the company are. So it's all about, I think, balance, building, and everybody's talking about is building relationships. Because without those relationships, we won't get to see the companies and we won't get to deploy the capital.
I'd agree with both of those points. Maybe I'll just take a bit different angle on it, just to not be repetitive. But I think one of the things that we're starting to see already is some pretty significant M&A in the sector, and I think that's a real positive for the sector that we're seeing large mergers happening. Typically, that is the start of a real strong bull market, is when you start to see these mega mergers happening, and we're seeing that in the gold space with Newmont bidding for Newcrest, with the Yamana acquisition by Agnico. And ultimately, that kind of activity in a sector is positive for the entire sector, especially when we see cash bids, because inevitably, let's say a company gets taken out for $5 billion cash, that money typically then filters into other companies to replenish those investments with the cash that those those funds or those individuals who own that stock receive. So mergers is a real positive for the sector, and it's been great to see that we've started to have some of that activity in the last 6 months or so.
One common theme I heard walking the floor of the convention was how hard it has been for companies to get funded, and how dry the capital is out there. And we have a database of about 8,000 family offices, and I can tell you, I'm willing to bet that 90% of them in the U.S. have no idea that that's the case. Okay, and they're just, they just look at the price of gold and they're probably saying to themselves, things don't look so bad. So my point of telling you that is, I feel like maybe the industry has a little bit of a chip on its shoulder, like it's been kicked too many times. But in the U.S., the perception of the industry is not that. And the other thing I would say, I could be wrong about this, I'm a layman, but from a layman's perspective, if you're in the lithium space, generally, this is the first time that the mining industry, I'm sure I'm wrong, at least from my perspective, that can carry the ESG banner and say, hey, listen, we're doing something that's good for the earth. So if you're in the lithium space, ESG is incredibly important to Gen 2, Gen 3, and that's a real opportunity. And so I think, off the back of that as well, there's a lot of dollars you can capture out there.
Thank you guys, and I know all of our panelists will be here up at the bar after the panel, and we don't want to take up too much time. We want to allow everybody to kind of chat. We've got a great mix of folks here before the kind of larger party starts in about 20 minutes or so. So before we break up, I would just make sure everybody knows that there are verified tablets set up. So if you want to kind of check out the verified technology. Certainly, if you want to check out Prospector, we've got lots of folks who can show you that too. But most importantly, does anybody in the room like bourbon or whiskey? So there's a table back by the entrance. If you put your business card in that little doohickey thing there, in a little bit, I think we've got Phil Hopwood here again to reprise his role in about an hour or so to do the drawing for the lovely whiskey and bourbon that I've picked out as the host of your favorite mining and bourbon podcast, On the Rocks. So make sure you drop your business card off over there so you can go home with a bottle of bourbon. And other than that, please grab some food, go to the bar, grab a drink, and write some checks. If you've got much